the silent patrol. Officer Jake Thompson had been patrolling the quiet streets of Coldwater for over a decade. It was the kind of town where nothing ever happened until it did. On this particular night, the fog was thicker than usual, rolling in from the nearby woods like a living entity. The mist clung to the ground, muffling the sounds of the night. Jake had always prided himself on his unshakable composure, but tonight there was something different in the air, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His radio crackled with static, and then a distorted voice broke through. "Unit 42, come in." Jake grabbed the receiver. "This is Unit 42, go ahead." "Jake, we got a call about some strange noises coming from the old Marston house on Elm. Neighbors said they heard screaming, but the place has been abandoned for years." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The Marston house had a reputation, one that made even the most hardened officers in the department uneasy. It had been the scene of a grisly murder-suicide years ago, a father who had slaughtered his family before hanging himself in the attic. Since then, no one had dared to go near it. "Roger," that Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm on my way." As he drove toward the house, the fog grew denser, wrapping around his cruiser like a suffocating blanket. The headlights barely cut through the gloom, but he could make out the dark silhouette of the Marston house looming ahead. Jake parked his cruiser on the curb, leaving the engine running as he stepped out. The air was cold, biting through his uniform, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the task at hand. The front door of the house stood slightly ajar, creaking as it swayed in the breeze. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the grip of his flashlight. Pushing the door open, he was met with a musty odor, the smell of decay and disuse. The interior was, as he remembered, frozen in time, with old furniture draped in sheets and dust covering every surface. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. There was no response, just the oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. He moved deeper into the house, his footsteps unnervingly loud on the wooden floor. The only light came from his flashlight, casting long, sinister shadows that danced on the walls. He reached the staircase leading to the second floor and hesitated. The murders had taken place upstairs. Taking a deep breath, Jake ascended the stairs, each creak of the wood beneath his boots making his heart pound faster. At the top, he turned toward the master bedroom where the bodies had been found. The door to the bedroom was closed. He reached for the knob, his hand trembling. As he turned it and pushed the door open, his flashlight flickered and then died, plunging the room into darkness. Jake cursed under his breath, smacking the flashlight against his palm in an attempt to revive it. When it flickered back on, he was met with a horrifying sight. Standing in the middle of the room was a figure, its back turned to him. It was tall and thin, dressed in tattered clothing that hung loosely from its frame. The stench of rot filled the air. "Freeze," Jake commanded, drawing his gun, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, silent and still. "Turn around," slowly Jake ordered, his voice trembling. The figure began to turn, and as it did, Jake felt his blood run cold. The face that met his gaze was not that of a living person. The skin was pale and stretched tight over the bones, eyes sunken into hollow sockets. It was the father from the Marston murders, his face twisted into a grotesque grin. Jake tried to back away, but his feet wouldn't move. The figure stepped closer, its eyes locking onto his, and he could feel an overwhelming force pulling him in, drowning him in darkness. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life again, snapping him out of the trance. "Jake, what's your status? Do you copy?" He fumbled for the receiver, unable to tear his eyes away from the figure. I need backup," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. But the radio only responded with static. The figure was inches away now, its cold breath on his face. Jake's mind raced, but he couldn't think, couldn't move. The figure's hand reached out, touching his chest, and Jake felt a searing pain as if his heart was being ripped from his body. And then everything went black. The next morning, when the backup finally arrived, they found Jake's cruiser parked outside the Marston house, engine still running. Inside, the house was as silent as the grave, but there was no sign of Officer Jake Thompson. Only his flashlight was found on the floor of the master bedroom, its beam still flickering in the darkness.